Okay, good evening. I am Dr. Paul Allen Sommerfeld. I'm a senior music reference specialist and AMS council member, and I would like to welcome you all to tonight's presentation, Recovering the Extraordinary Life and Songs of Carrie Jacobs Bond, the next installment in a lecture series that the Music Division co-sponsors with the American Musicological Society. We began the series over 15 years ago with the intention of highlighting meaningful scholarship that American Musicological Society members have produced in researching the library's unique music collections. Over the past decade, we have been fortunate to learn about a variety of topics from Schoenberg to Showboat. And today, we turn to Carrie Jacobs Bond and her prolific body of song. As always, we are recording tonight's lecture so that it will be available to watch online in the coming months on both the library's website and YouTube channel. Past lectures are already available online. And for those of you here tonight, I'd like to point out that we have a wonderful display of materials relevant to tonight's lecture, and if you haven't had a chance to look, please do so after tonight's talk. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Christopher Reynolds, Distinguished Professor Emeritus at the University of California, Davis, and currently Edward A. Dixon Emeritus Professor. He has published extensively in 3 different areas: Renaissance music, music by Beethoven, Brahms, and Wagner, and increasingly women composers in the decades after 1890. Linking these 3 areas is his interest in musical illusion. His article, Porgy and Bess, an American Wozzeck, in the Journal of the Society for American Music, won awards from the American Musicological Society and the Kurt Weill Foundation. His most recent book is entitled Wagner, Schumann, and the Lessons of Beethoven's Ninth. For the past several years, he has been engaged in writing a biography of Carrie Jacobs Bond. In addition to teaching at UC Davis, Christopher Reynolds has held visiting professorships at Yale, Stanford, and UC Berkeley, in Germany at the University of Heidelberg and the University of Göttingen, and in Florence, Italy at the Villa Itati. He has been editor of the AMS Studies in Music Monograph series published with the Oxford University Press, and was a founding editor of the yearbook Beethoven Forum, and currently the website Women's Song Forum, now in its 5th year. His extensive collection of songs by women published between 1790 and 1970 now exceeds 7,000 songs. It is largely housed in special collections of the UC Davis Library. Reynolds has served 2 years as president of the AMS and has been elected to memberships in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and also the Academia Europaea. Please join me in welcoming Chris Reynolds.
Thank you, Paul. It's an honor to be the next speaker in this series. I'm grateful to the Library of Congress. I'm grateful to the American Musicological Society, and I'm grateful to all of you for showing up on this frigid evening. I hope it will be worth your while. For those fortunate enough to get in, the 10th annual Chicagoland Music Festival surpassed all expectations. On a warm late August evening in 1939, in the last days before the outbreak of war, a racially mixed crowd of 90,000 people squeezed into Soldier Field on Chicago's Lake Shore for 3 hours of music and dance. 15,000 people were turned away. The broad field in the middle of the stadium accommodated an additional 8,000 people. A symphony orchestra, several large bands, the festival Negro chorus of 1,000 voices, 3 choirs of 3,500 white singers, and 1,750 dancers. For the first time ever in festival history, the festivities included jazz played by Fats Waller and his band. Millions listened at home on their radios to WGN, to stations of the Mutual Broadcasting System, and to the Canadian network. Even the BBC carried it. Roughly 2 hours in, the crowd awaited the culminating appearances of the festival's 2 headliners and the guest of honor, Carrie Jacobs Bond. At approximately 10 p.m., the MC introduced a revered figure who had just celebrated her 78th birthday, quote, "a little gray-haired lady who is here tonight as our honored guest." He directed everyone's attention to the South Gate, to the open limousine that transported Mrs. Bond. As her car rounded the curve of the field, an orchestra played two of her songs. First of all, "I Love You Truly." Jumping to their feet, men waved their hats, women their handkerchiefs. Their continuous roar nearly drowned out the orchestra. But then, as she approached the stage at the north end of the field and the sounds of a perfect day began, the entire stadium joined in. Everyone knew this song by heart. As emotionally draining as this event was, for Mrs. Bond, it was just one of several guest of honor appearances in the coming months. Radio shows in New York City, then in early October in Philadelphia as Woman of the Week on General Electric's popular Hour of Charm program on the NBC network. Her next stop was to have been in Manhattan at the Festival of American Music, sponsored by ASCAP. Carrie had agreed to appear in Carnegie Hall in a concert that also featured Irving Berlin, George M. Cohan, and Rui Valley. She had always been among ASCAP's top royalty earners, with payments based on the number of times songs were performed on radio broadcasts. In 1938, her earnings of about $10,000, roughly $230,000 in today's dollars, put her in an elite group with Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern, George Gershwin's estate, and the lyricist Lou Brown. In the envious words of Irving Berlin's first biographer, quote, "This fantastic success of Mrs. Bond's is an afflicting thought to all songfolk of Broadway." But instead of taking time for Carnegie Hall, Mrs. Bond began another cross-country trip, returning first to Chicago to be guest of honor at the Conference of Club Presidents and Program Chairmen held at the Chicago Art Institute. From there, it was on to San Francisco to be honored at the World's Fair, the Golden Gate International Exposition, which took place on Treasure Island, a man-made island constructed in San Francisco Bay specifically for this fair. The organizers had declared October 18th Carrie Jacobs Bond Day. Many of that day's 45,000 ticket holders watched as she was proclaimed Mayor of Treasure Island and decorated with a gold medallion. Thousands more attended the symphony concert in the immense ballroom of the California building that evening, when she accompanied a singer for her two latest songs. Carrie Jacobs Bond was, for half a century, one of the very most popular songwriters, not just in the United States, but around the world. Today, she is arguably the most important forgotten American songwriter. She founded Carrie Jacobs Bond and Son with her son, Fred Smith, and published millions of copies of her songs, even painting the cover art for the first decade. She is, therefore, also one of the most important overlooked self-made women in the country, an early and pioneering female entrepreneur. She seized on every technical innovation to communicate with her millions of followers, from several models of player pianos and piano rolls to recordings on cylinders and discs, films, silent and with sound, radio broadcasts, and syndicated newspaper columns. But in the early years, as she built her career, Mrs. Bond's primary way of reaching her audiences was to perform for them. People came to her entertainments to hear her sing her sentimental songs, recite her poetry, and tell her heart stories. She had a charisma and an ability to connect instantly with audiences, whether poor, middle class, or very wealthy, whether prisoners at a state penitentiary in Illinois, vacationers at the Hotel Hollywood, or presidents of the United States in the White House. She was an indefatigable entertainer and self-promoter who gave thousands of performances. Initially in the late 1890s, widowed at 34 with a 13-year-old boy to support, she performed in Chicago. Then for 3 years, she toured the women's clubs in private homes throughout Iowa. By 1902, sponsored by the governor of Illinois and his wife, she filled Steinway Hall in Chicago for a testimonial concert of her music and poetry, performed by herself along with leading American opera singer Jessie Bartlett Davis and others. Mrs. Bond is the composer of nearly 200 songs and piano pieces, many poems, and a few books, including books for children and her 1927 autobiography, The Roads of Melody, My Story. From the outset, she presented herself as a singer and songwriter without pretensions to greatness in either realm. With the financial backing of Jessie Bartlett Davis, then at the height of her career, she began to publish her simple songs in booklets, issuing her breakthrough set, 7 songs as unpretentious as The Wild Rose, in 1901. Collections of 9, 10, 11, and 12 songs soon followed, always with the same self-effacing subtitle, Unpretentious. Critics often thought of her music either as semi-classical or as high-class songs, or, because so many millions of people sang her songs, as folk music, calling her a descendant of Stephen Foster. She melded sentimental words and tuneful melodies in ways that made her songs easy for amateurs to sing, but with an emotional power that drew opera singers as well as jazz and popular musicians to them. Several of her best-selling songs have melodic spans of an octave or less. As did Foster, she drew from several musical traditions: Anglo-Celtic ballads, spirituals, and slave songs of Black Americans, and art songs and arias of European composers like Robert Schumann or Jacques Offenbach. At times sorrowful, at times humorous, Carrie's songs reach deeply into the collective consciousness of her audiences. They spoke of friendship, enduring love, hope, longing and absence, death, faith in the power of hard work, nature and gardens, childhood. Many were short. A stanza of I Love You Truly or A Perfect Day needs 16 bars. Just a Weary and For You, only 12. Nevertheless, these are substantial when compared to her humorous set of 12 smile songs. There's a copy on the back from 1910, most of which are just 8 bars, some only 4. A related set called half-minute songs, comparable in spirit to the creations of Eric Satie, appeared a year later. In fact, these 4-bar aphoristic songs last barely 10 seconds. The first, Making the Best of It, crescendos to a climactic pause and then delivers its emphatic 2-syllable punch word. What you can't help, what you can't help, what you can't help, forget. A sure measure of her broad appeal. Professional singers and performers of all musical styles embraced Bond's songs. Many leading opera singers promoted them in their recitals, in dozens of recordings, and in testimonials. Their identities are documented on the labels of cylinder discs and 78s, and in newspaper reviews and music magazines. But one can also glean their admiration in the names of those who allowed her to dedicate songs to them. Most of all, her dear friend and neighbor, Ernestina Schumann-Heink, the dedicatee of 3 songs. Others included Mariska Aldrich, Rosa Ponselle, Amelita Galli-Curci, Tito Schipa, and Lawrence Tibbett. Although vaudeville and Broadway musicians had always performed her songs, Elsie Baker and Eubie Blake are among the first to make recordings, with the advent of national radio networks in the late 1920s, popular musicians and swing band leaders increasingly arranged and recorded their versions of her songs. A gala performance from 1940, when she was 79, sparked this recollection from W.C. Handy. Quote, "A distinct hush overcame the audience as Mr. Buck presented the beloved Mrs. Carrie Jacobs Bond, America's most successful woman music publisher and writer. As she played The End of a Perfect Day, it took me back to the days of my dance orchestra, when we always closed our sessions with this lovely melody." As a singer, she forthrightly, or preemptively, acknowledged her lack of training. Already from the first reviews in newspapers and journals, comments about her modest vocal skills indicate that she herself made her limitations clear to her audiences. A Chicago reviewer quotes her at her Steinway Hall concert in 1902, quote, "I am just a linnet with one little chirp." He mixed praise with deprecation, quote, "The music of Mrs. Bond," writes, "is not great music, but it is music that appeals to a large class of people by its frank melodiousness and by the essentially human text." This oppositional formulation, not this, but that, was frequently invoked and soon taken a step further in St. Paul. Quote, "She is not a great composer, yet her tone pictures touch the heart. She is not a great poet, but the rhyme she has written brings smiles and tears. She is not a great singer, but the tender cadence of her sweet, deep voice stirs the emotions." No training could account for her remarkable ability to perform under extreme stress. In 1904, Carrie was then 43, a wealthy friend arranged for her to perform in London at a high society gala evening hosted by Mrs. Frank Mackay in her palatial home. Members of the British aristocracy attended. The American ambassador was there. Mrs. Mackay greeted her guest dressed in white satin, wearing a diamond tiara and ropes of pearls. Still not financially solvent, Carrie had designed and sewn her own concert gown. That evening, she took turns on the stage with a young operatic tenor, Enrico Caruso. She sang 2 of her songs, he sang several arias. She performed 2 more. He returned to close out the evening. Caruso reportedly praised one of her songs that evening, "Movin' in the Best Society, a Colored Consolation." A plea for racial equality, the poem of one of her own in black dialect, she proposed that if black and white children were given, quote, "an equal chance to start out side by side, that color line will fade." This radical idea, radical for white people, brought Carrie her first mention in the British press. She, quote, "has voiced in one of her songs a plea for a kindlier feeling between the white and black races, to such good purpose that it is already widely sung in the Negro schools," end quote. Booker T. Washington considered the song, quote, "as good as a sermon." An extended account of her entertainment she gave in 1908 in Honolulu shows one critic struggling to convey exactly what it was that made the evening so extraordinary. This was the first of her visits to Hawaii, so the reporter wrote at length. "Enjoyable as it is unique is the entertainment with which Carrie Jacobs Bond pleases the large audiences which have greeted her each appearance in Honolulu during the past week. Mrs. Bond has temperament. She is either a consummate actor, or else she is one of the plainest, simplest, and most natural persons in the world. She has worked out a system of philosophy that is homely and kind and rings true. She is absolutely without affectation, or else her affectation is the highest type of art. Her store of the sweetest and best in human emotion seems to be the distilled essence of experience in the joys and sorrows of life, sweetened with a great sympathy for human imperfections. She is swayed by her moods and rearranges her program of little songs and readings as fancy strikes her, and interpolates with bits of confidential philosophy based on her experiences or observations of things surrounding her. Mrs. Bond is not a singer in the sense in which the term is generally understood, and yet a prima donna would envy her power of expression and the hold she has on her hearers in the simple little songs she sings to her own accompaniment, most of which are entirely her own authorship and composition. All of them. Some of them have not even a pretense of music in them, except for the accompaniment, which she plays with the touch and feeling of a true musician. but are simply talked in a low sympathetic tone, which sways her audience from smiles to tears, apparently at will. Mrs. Bond deserves all the success she has attained. One cannot think of her as being a professional entertainer, but one rather carries away the impression of having been talked to and sung for by an old and intimate friend whose heart you know and who knows you. Versions of this description crop up in state after state. Critics in Alabama, Ohio, New York, all comment on the way she would sit at the piano, look not at the keyboard, but directly at her listeners, and sing in her untrained yet captivating voice, or simply speak the words over the accompaniment, and in so doing pull the audience back and forth between laughter and tears. A photo from 1906 catches her in this pose. An overview of her life and career from 1916 again raises the issue of professionalism and portrays her as a consummate actress. Her concerts are, quote, her concerts are not in the stilted manner of a professional. They rather reveal the rare combination of poetess, singer, and composer. Even when she talks her songs or half sings them, there is the joyousness, the note of pathos that would make Mrs. Bond famous as an actress if she were not a composer. With the advent of rock and roll and country music, singer-songwriters who achieved great success without having a trained voice became commonplace. And yet, long before Nina Simone, Joni Mitchell, and Loretta Lynn wrote and performed songs about their own lives, Carrie made plain the autobiographical content of her songs. Eventually, critics identify what distinguished her from other performers. Quote, she does not give a concert, which is a collaboration of several intellects, a combination of many poets, singers, and composers. Her entertainment is a Carrie Jacobs Bond evening, one intelligence, one creation, interpretation, and expression, singing in the one soul. No wonder we love to hear her without just knowing why our delight and appreciation is so different. Bob Dylan, like Bond, had the added dimension of being a professional who made a career of impersonating an amateur, a performer who affected an air of unpretentiousness. Both Bond and Dylan cultivated their lack of pretension. But as Zimmerman did not become Dylan overnight, he had years of performing to small groups and coffee houses before Joan Baez invited him to join her on stage. It took many long, lean years for Carrie to find her voice. Before Carrie Jacobs Bond began to tour as a means of promoting her songs, there was no such thing as a woman singer-songwriter. Women composers such as Lisa Lehman in England and Amy Beach in Boston occasionally presented their own works. They, like others, assumed the role of accompanist in recitals of their songs, entrusting the singing to professionals. Women who toured were either opera stars singing arias and songs composed by others, or they traveled with vaudeville troupes. Carrie's success soon paved the way for other women to tour with their own songs. It also inspired hundreds of women to compose, and in many cases, self-publish. By the time Chaminade toured the United States in 1908, Carrie had proven for many years that there was a national market for women composer-performers who exclusively performed their own music. Mrs. Bond was a woman of multiple contradictions. Her practice of apologizing for her supposedly untrained voice at the start of her memorable recitals is but one example. She was a feminist who extolled the virtues of women remaining in their home to raise their children. A compulsive traveler, she repeatedly praised the importance of staying home. Prone to illness throughout her life with regular physical and mental breakdowns and as many recuperations in hospitals and sanitariums, she nevertheless toured the U.S. for nearly 25 years, performing for thousands of audiences. From her beginnings in Chicago, she was recognized for her support of Black Americans, manifesting those convictions multiple times in actions and songs. But in later years, she counted among her friends and dinner companions Rufus B. von Kleinsmith, longtime president of USC and vocal supporter of eugenics and sterilization programs. The many details of her fascinating but forgotten life are of interest primarily in the context of her long treasured but now forgotten songs. Indeed, high-profile events like the 10th annual Chicagoland Music Festival honored her music as much as her life. 3 of her songs that achieve central places in the rituals of American life and death will demonstrate the reach of her influence. Weddings. I Love You Truly achieved a cultural status, a ubiquity that few songs ever approach. Boosted by its presence in a long line of Hollywood films, it became iconic. Soon after World War II, one critic quipped that half the women in America appear to believe I Love You Truly is a legal part of a church wedding service. But the link between ceremony and song took decades to achieve. The spur for the song was not a wedding, but the accidental death in 1895 of her husband, Frank Bond. Carrie then retreated to her hometown, Janesville, Wisconsin, intending to settle. There, she wrote the poem, but not yet the music. That followed several years later. The poem, just 8 lines, can be read as her speaking to Frank. She declares her love. She acknowledges her sorrow. She feels his continuing presence and enduring love. In the imagined presence of Frank, her actual grief-filled life fades into dreams. Instead of the patriarchal bombast and lofty formal speech of other popular wedding songs of the time, Bond's verses are calm, measured, and mutually respectful. You love me truly, answers the opening declaration with confidence. Sorrow and doubt have a place, as do tears, but all fade at the touch of a loving hand. Quite by chance, Bond wrote a poem that expressed love in a way that couples starting their shared lives would embrace for much of the century. Within years of its publication, the transformation of I Love You Truly from a song that commemorated the end of a joint life to one that celebrated beginnings was underway. Tracking only weddings that took place in June, and only weddings reported in newspapers now available digitally, the rise is clear. In 1906, it was sung at several weddings regionally, and then grew year by year. Vaudeville singer Elsie Baker's 1912 chart-stopping recording and others that then followed doubtless fed demand for the song. When movies added sound, directors and producers continued the practices of pianists, organists, and orchestras that had accompanied silent films, playing I Love You Truly whenever weddings or declarations of love played on screen. It was sung uncredited in The Trespasser, 1929, by Gloria Swanson in her sound film debut. In one of the few happy scenes in this sad pre-code film, she sings it to herself and to her new husband, Robert Ames, the morning after having eloped. Over the next 20 years, directors took pains to find clever new ways to incorporate it into their films. At the end of World War II, Frank Capra had it written into the script of It's a Wonderful Life, as many movies with wedding scenes had done before. It appears at the romantic climax when James Stewart finally returns home to Donna Reed.
Mary, where did you... I love you truly, truly, dear.
Remember the night we broke the windows in this old house? This is what I wished for.
Adding to the song's visibility, dance bands and crooners discovered it. This song was not only Bing Crosby's first hit with Decca Records in 1934, it was his first Decca recording altogether. In fact, it was also a first for Decca. Jack Kapp chose Bing Crosby and this song to launch his new recording company. If wedding customs influenced Hollywood, that influence went both ways. The June tally in the 1930s, peaking in 1937 when 2,800 brides, grooms, congregations, and clergy heard Bond's song. By 1939, so many couples got married to the sounds of Bond's wedding song that one reporter dubbed June I Love You Truly month. Anyone who officiated at weddings heard the song over and over and over again. And so, as I Love You Truly became a standard part of North American weddings, churches across the United States and Canada began to outlaw it. The grounds usually given for blacklisting were that the song was insufficiently sacred. Yet another unstated reason could have well been oral fatigue. Couples getting married programmed Bond's song all the time. It was too popular. And that brings us to funerals. After Sam Cooke, the King of Soul, was murdered in Los Angeles in December 1964, thousands of mourners at the emotionally charged funeral service in Mount Sinai Baptist Church heard a succession of gospel songs from several of Cooke's illustrious friends and colleagues. Lou Rawls sang Just a Closer Walk with Thee. Bobby Blue Bland, Lord, I'm Coming Home. And Ray Charles, Angels Keep Watching Over Me, with the congregation joining Charles on the chorus. As powerful as these gospel songs must have been, according to the account published the next day in the Los Angeles Sentinel, baritone Arthur Simpkins climaxed the singing with his rendition of I've Done My Work by Jacob Bond. None of her other songs has been embraced by African-American gospel singers, both professional and amateur, as long and as consistently as I've Done My Work. Beginning with the Pace Jubilee Singers in 1929, there have been 7 recordings of the song, all of them by Black musicians. Subsequent performers of I've Done My Work have included the Jubilaires, Mahalia Jackson, and Clara Ward. Most recent is the 2004 recording by the Chicago Gospel Keyboard Pioneers with Geraldine Gay on the piano. The Pioneers identify the composer only as traditional, indicating that this song has survived a century as part of an oral tradition of gospel music. The spiritual-like lyrics of the song were by a white friend of Carrie's, Dr. George Caldwell, a surgeon in San Francisco and a minor poet. This poem speaks from the standpoint of someone nearing the later years of life, looking backward and taking stock, yet also looking forward, confident that a path to salvation is clear. By 1920, Caldwell's words had layers of meaning for Carrie. Almost 60, thinking, wrongly, that her days as a performer were almost finished, she looked back on a career in which she had indeed sung her songs, year after year. Mrs. Bond's music arguably had a model, one that may explain the recognition her song achieved in Black churches. While the rhythms are different, the melody shares the notes of its first and last phrases with the well-known spiritual, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, a song that also expresses the thoughts of somebody looking back on a life of pain and sorrow. In the years before Bond wrote I've Done My Work, the spiritual had 2 prominent arrangements published, both of which quickly generated recordings. Harry T. Burley arranged it in 1917, a version immediately recorded for Columbia. And in 1919, the year Clarence Cameron White founded the National Association of Negro Musicians, Fritz Kreisler recorded White's version for Victrola, as did the Black soprano Frances Cole Talbert. Here is one by the Pace Jubilee Singers, this one from 1929.
I've done my work.
The inclusion of this special song at Sam Cooke's ceremony is part of a century-long tradition. A few examples from funerals of Black celebrities. In Chicago, in 1931, the funeral of Ida B. Wells, beloved civil rights activist and a founder of the National Association of Colored Women's Club, was austere. The crowd at the People's Community Church was packed so tightly it took an hour for the throngs to view the casket. There was no flashy oratory, and only 2 songs were performed. One of them, I've Done My Work. Chicago is also where more than 5,000 worshipers turned out for Jack Johnson's funeral in 1946, squeezing into historic Pilgrim Baptist Church to pay tribute to the first Black world heavyweight boxing champion. There, in the citadel of Black gospel music, as the mourners watched his coffin being carried slowly down the central aisle, lyrical tenor Maurice Cooper sang, I've Done My Work. It was introduced as one of Jack's favorite songs. 4 years after he appeared at the 10th annual Chicagoland Music Festival, Fats Waller died from pneumonia on a cross-country train trip. He was just 39. His Christmas Eve funeral in Harlem's Abyssinian Baptist Church was dubbed his last show. The stellar group of pallbearers included James P. Johnson, Claude Hopkins, and Duke Ellington. The Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr. delivered the eulogy. Powell's wife sang, I've Done My Work, because Waller's sister had requested it. She said it was a favorite song of Fats. Los Angeles, Chicago, New York City. The King of Soul, a civil rights leader, a former heavyweight champion, and an illustrious jazz pianist at the top of his profession. A favorite song. The embrace of Bond's song was national, but it was not limited to big city funerals of the famous. 2 weeks before her death in 1990, Sister Thea Bowman gave an interview on her thoughts about dying, in which she recites the entire poem, noting that she had sung I've Done My Work at the funerals of her father and mother, that she and others do not mention Bond's name, that the song is often thought of as anonymous, as traditional, indicates that Carrie's songs were, as many in her life described them, folk music. This song was strong enough to console mourners in moments of extreme sorrow. And now to gatherings of all kinds. On the very day of the 10th annual Chicagoland Music Festival, baritone Lawrence Tibbett was quoted in Santa Barbara extolling A Perfect Day as the most popular song ever written. Dale Carnegie hailed it in his national column as the most popular song of the 20th century. How in this era of big bands playing Tin Pan Alley songs across the country could A Perfect Day from 1910 take precedence over hit songs by Gershwin, Jerome Kern, and Irving Berlin? Already by the end of 1921, sales of sheet music were widely reported to have reached 5 million, an unparalleled figure. By her death in 1946, more than 7 million copies of the song in arrangements for every conceivable combination of voices and instruments had been sold, along with 5 million records. Because Mrs. Bond wrote the words and music, designed the cover, and also published the song, her profits from this song enriched her, allowing her to travel and to build an apartment building in Chicago, multiple homes in the Hollywood Hills, and a hilltop bungalow north of San Diego. A Perfect Day was sung at many weddings and funerals, and at the end of local, regional, and national meetings of a full range of clubs and societies. President Harding commanded the United States Marine Band to conclude all of their public appearances with it. Sometimes termed a parlor song, this domestic label is far too confining for the various functions served by A Perfect Day. Translated into dozens of languages, it was performed around the world at church services, summer band concerts in the park, civic meetings, conventions, variety entertainments, and in plays and films. At least 245 recordings exist. This song was a favorite of millions of World War I soldiers, sung by American forces, those of the individual nations of the British Empire, and in translation as Le Jour divin by French troops. During the war, A Perfect Day moved soldiers because it transported them home, or it moved them simply because they were grateful to have survived another day. In the years after the war, it reminded them of army buddies buried in a French or Flemish war cemetery. Mrs. Bond regularly received emotional letters from soldiers thanking her for the song. Into the 1930s, she heard from the soldiers themselves, but also from mothers, wives, and sisters of men who had died, women who wanted her to know how much her song had meant to their soldier. The popularity of A Perfect Day seems due equally to the melody and the words. Instrumental versions of the tune played everywhere. Newspapers and magazines regularly published words by themselves. Printed artfully, the poem was often framed and hung. Mrs. Bond wrote the poem in 1909 after a day of motoring with friends in the hills around Riverside, California, and watching a brilliant January sunset from Mount Rubidoux. The music came to her a few months later while driving through the Mojave Desert. Surprisingly, for a hit song of its time, the message is not about love, but friendship. The tone not witty, but sincere. As in I Love You Truly, Bond recognizes the inevitability that life will have challenges. A heart will tire. Friends must part. Joy and sadness both have their place. Signs of the song's cultural significance in the decades before the Chicagoland Festival abound. The title became a meme for political cartoonists and artists who quickly seized on the notion of a perfect day to portray all manner of scenes, some heartfelt, many ironic. A drunk leaning up against a midnight lamppost, a photo of a crying 2-year-old boy unwilling to end his day at the beach. Of the hundreds of such cartoons from these years, none was more celebrated than that by the syndicated cartoonist Gar Williams, who drew his iconic image of a triumphant doughboy for the Indianapolis News. It first appeared on the 20th of July, 1918, beneath the paper's large headline, Huns repulsed are retiring across the Marne. Here are excerpts from 2 recordings that will demonstrate the span of this song's popularity. First, one by a white gospel group that had a particular popularity in Texas, the Imperial Quartet from 1915.
When you come to the end of the perfect day, and sit alone with your soul, while the time ring up with a carol again, for the joy of day has grown. Do you think what's the end of a perfect day can mean to a tired heart?
And now Rosa Poncell, 1925. Okay. Preston Sturgis drew on the deep affection that the common people felt for the song as he wrote the script for a pivotal scene in the movie Remember the Night, which was filmed in summer 1939. In a plain farmhouse parlor on Christmas Eve, Sterling Holloway insists on singing A Perfect Day, accompanied on the piano by the troubled visitor Barbara Stanwyck. When Fred McMurray's family joins in, she has an epiphany and realizes that the song speaks directly to her predicament. Although she has indeed found the soul of a friend, the two lovers will, for a time at least, have to part. She tears up, overwhelmed at the end of an emotional day. So too did audiences watching the film. Modern viewers of this film, unaware of the song and its dramatic significance, miss the import of A Perfect Day in this scene.
I can play a piece. I used to play in the 10-cent store.
But that'd be nice.
I can sing the end of A Perfect Day.
Willie.
Well, I can.
Well, so can everybody else.
Come on, Willie, sing.
All right. When you come to the end of a perfect day, and you sit alone with your thought, while the chimes ring out with a carol gay, for the joy that the day has brought. Do you think what the end of a perfect day can mean to your tired heart? When the sun goes down with a flaming ray, and the dear friends have to part.
Three remarkable songs, three songs that in different circumstances became central parts of American rituals and celebrations. And yet today these songs are seldom sung and are now unknown except to a few. And as for the woman who composed them, the life of Carrie Jacobs Bond is a story that remains untold. In comparison, the composers who shared with her the honor in the 1930s of being the top earners of ASCAP, Irving Berlin, George Gershwin, and Jerome Kern, have been written about over and over, the subjects of biographies and biopics. Berlin leads the group with 19 biographies, 7 of them since 2000. Gershwin is right behind with 18, 9 since 2000, and Jerome Kern, 7. Carrie Jacobs Bond, there's one short self-published biography from 2003, copies of which I found in 3 libraries in the country, and a brief biographical novel from 2008 by the ragtime pianist Max Morath. While I don't begrudge these 3 deserving men the many accounts of their lives, the focus on them has distorted the picture we have of popular music in the first half of the 20th century. The exceptional Mrs. Bond outsold them all, and yet, nearly 80 years after her death, she's still waiting for her first scholarly biography. Stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have time for questions.
Yes.
Everyone can hear.
So just from looking at that exhibit at the back, I noticed that her first song that she published was after her husband died and she needed to support herself. And that's a pattern that was similar with women authors of that period as well, that they sort of dabbled in writing and then their husbands died and they had to support themselves and they became professional writers. And in her case, she became a professional songwriter. Do you think her career would have had legs behind it? Would she have had a trajectory if she hadn't had to support herself?
That's a really interesting question. It's actually the case that she began to publish before Frank Bond tragically died. He had lost a lot of money in a crash, 1893, and she thought, well, I'm going to do something. And evidently, she said this was the one fight she ever had with Frank, that he didn't want her to promote herself. And so she went from this little mining town in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, Iron River, down to Chicago in January 1895 and found a publisher for 2 songs and a singer to put one of them into a play, which was a hit. And she made friends with this nationally syndicated columnist named Amber, who wrote a column about this woman's pluck, a word that stayed with her, that resurfaced periodically throughout her lifetime. That people commented on the pluck of this woman. So she was beginning to write. Had he not died, would she have moved to Chicago? I doubt it. She would not have had a career from Iron River. She moved initially back home to Janesville and thought her mother and family and friends would help, but her mother was divorcing for the 3rd time when her soon-to-be divorced 3rd husband shot himself in the head, and I think her mother became sort of not the most popular person in Janesville. And so they all moved to Chicago. And she had to feed several people. So yeah, the necessity that has motivated lots of women to become writers is exactly what pushed her. I think, yes, she was a feminist, but she would have been quite happy being this eccentric church-playing organist, publishing a song now and then. Yes.
Great talk. And following up on that, my question is, how did you get her start as a performer? As you know, I'm very interested in women who are professional performers on stage.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Jessie Bartlett Davis. Was the work of, say, operatic managers in the, say, 1880s, 1890s, that's probably a little early, but she was born, what, 61, right?
Yeah, she thought she was born in 62, but she was born a year.
Okay, so she was in her 20s in the 80s and was aware, in the 80s. So she was aware of people like Emma Abbott, who was also described as plucky.
I'm not so sure that she was in Janesville, very unhappily married to somebody who was not interested in her, and she was the mother of a baby and young infant.
Okay.
So she did a little bit of performing, and she had a cousin in Iowa that she went down and visited, but she didn't get around.
So how did she get a start? I mean, you've described it just now in response to a question, but I kept wondering, how did she go from being basically a housewife who was maybe singing some songs and writing some things to being an internationally known performer? It takes a long time, but she had to get started somehow.
Very important is that map of Iowa that I put up briefly at the beginning. I think of it as her Chitlin circuit, the circuit, or for the Beatles, the club in Hamburg that they performed nightly, hour after hour after hour. And for her, it was trying out new songs, a mix of songs and poems and stories with different accents in very supportive groups of women. And all along, she made friends who believed in her, all along. So she had a kind of charisma that was crucial for her success.
So the women's club circuit basically
that was huge for her.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about Davis? You mentioned her, but she was a performer. She was an operatic singer.
Yeah.
What kind of influence did she have?
Well, she loaned her, I think she thought she was giving her several $100s, which allowed Carrie to then go and publish her collection of songs. That really landmark collection of 11 songs, which had several hits. Just a Weary End for You is in there, which was one of her big songs. She would go to parties and sing. She made ends meet by painting china. The cover, it may take me a while to get back there. The cover of her early music had this pattern, and I'm convinced that this is probably what she put onto plates.
Probably so.
Because there are many plates with, I've looked for some, and nothing is signed CJB or Bond or anything. But she did this long enough and often enough that there have to be plates out there that she did. And so this would have communicated to women, I think, in particular, because it was a scene that they knew from their own kitchens. The strength of the women's movement was very important. The strength of support from Jessie Bartlett Davis and David Bispam was very important. And he was important for a lot of women songwriters of the time. Yes.
Did she write all the way to the end of her life? I mean, did she could stop writing and live for a long time afterwards, or did she write the whole way?
She wrote pretty consistently through the 1920s. In 27, she published her autobiography. The next year, she published a collection of her most popular songs. She kept writing, but then late in 1928, shortly before Christmas, her son shot himself. Went up to his cabin in Idlewild, in Southern California, put on the record, The End of a Perfect Day, and shot himself. He wrote notes to his mother, to his kids, to his wife, and to a friend. And this, her father probably had committed suicide. Her husband was killed in a freak accident. Her son shot himself. Medical reasons, probably. She lost it for a while. She did then write a few more songs. Not several a year, one every few years. Pretty much up until she died, yeah.
I assume there's no recordings?
Of her as a pianist, yes, there are piano rolls that she made.
How about singing?
There are records that she went in, I think it was 1913, 14 or so, and did some recordings. But I don't think her method of performance transferred to a disc. Anyway, those, so far as I know, don't survive. Paul, if you can find
that would be a question for the recorded sound division.
Can you comment on your comment of her being in and out of sanatoria? Can you comment on your comment of her being in and out of sanatoria?
She worked so hard that I think, she routinely would take a night train after a performance to the next city, perform, and then take a train to the next city. And there's only so long you can do this. And she was starting out, virtually into her 40s doing this. So she wore herself down over and over again and then needed to recover. But she also almost died in 1909, late 1908, went into the hospital, evidently had an operation. It's not clear to me that she really did have an operation. She had bad lungs, and so got chest infections a lot, and ended up, there's a sanatorium in Pasadena that she checked herself into. She also checked herself onto cruises a lot, went to Hawaii 3 times, went to the Middle East, went through the Panama Canal. One of those trips was to help her recover from the death of her son. So she needed help, and there were often stories in newspapers, Carrie Jacobs Bond is near death in a hospital. She got caught in a sandstorm between Riverside and Los Angeles in Ontario, basically, one windy evening, and inhaled sand, and this was pretty serious. And nationwide, she was reported to be on death's door. She survived.
Was the publishing company in Chicago, Bond and Son, was that her one son that she had?
Yes. Yeah.
From the
Fred
before
Smith.
she married Bond.
Yeah, exactly.
And
then in 1920, it moved to Hollywood. This is one of the early prints because it's from her house her apartment on 31st Street in Chicago.
Without asking the obvious, why do you think her work has been buried?
I'm so grateful for that question because I didn't have time to go.
The question was, why has her music been buried, or
why did it get forgotten? It was a slow process of forgetting. That is to say, the generation that tuned into Lawrence Welk in the 60s and 70s still regularly heard her music. But for those of my generation who had no interest whatsoever in Lawrence Welk, made fun of it, her songs gradually disappeared. They are reviving now. I think the reason is not because she was a woman songwriter. I don't think gender plays a role in this. I think it's the sentimentality. And so World War I was the beginning of the end of sentimentality. World War II killed it. It lost all respect. James Baldwin is particularly forceful about how horrible sentiment is.
Excused of that?
Where Gershwin and Berlin were not so sentimental. They were witty. And the kind of wit that was popular with Tin Pan Alley songwriters survived. And in fact, I think inspired, it's an article in a German journal, but I think that Tin Pan Alley songs are actually behind a lot of early rock songs of Beatles, Rolling Stones, and other people who just modernized the language. So the kind of wit, the interest in sex, or the possibility of sex being the secret message of some more subtle songs, is there with Gershwin and Berlin, and it's there in the 50s with rock musicians. That was of no interest to Bond at all. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question.
I'm just interested, I'm sort of clueless about the popular music of the young persons today. do they have more interest in this type of music than my generation, you know, the boomer and X generation? Do you know?
You know, I have to plead ignorance. I think that there is a huge variety. There are no central figures today. Well, Taylor Swift, I guess, that everybody listens to. There are all these niche markets, is my impression. I think the possibility for sentiment is returning. And I note that there are some very recent recordings of Carrie Jacobs Bond songs turning up on YouTube. I'm quite heartened by that, actually.
Right, well, thank you so much. We can always take some more time after the show